But picture this. Lions Drag Strip, Southern California, 1952. A Korean War veteran pulls up to the staging lights in a bone-stock Willys MB, the same Jeep that stormed Normandy beaches. Across from him, a flathead Ford with twice the horsepower and a proper 3-speed transmission. The crowd literally laughs. This thing maxes out at 65 miles per hour with a tailwind and enough prayer. But when the lights drop, something happens that makes the entire strip go silent. The setup. What Detroit thought about Jeeps. Let's rewind to 1952, because you need to understand just how absurd this whole situation was. The war had been over for 7 years. American automotive culture was exploding. Hot rodding had gone from illegal street racing to organized drag strips. Every weekend, guys were showing up with chopped Model A's, souped-up flatheads, and the occasional Oldsmobile Rocket 88, making everyone else look slow. And then there were Jeeps. Nobody, and I mean nobody, thought of Jeeps as performance vehicles. These were the things farmers used to pull stumps, the vehicles that rural mail carriers drove through mud, ex-military surplus that you could buy for $300 if you didn't mind the olive drab paint and bullet holes. They were utilitarian to the point of being agricultural. Calling a Jeep a performance vehicle was like calling a tractor a sports car. Detroit's attitude was even worse. The Big Three looked at Jeeps the way you'd look at a garden tool. Sure, they were useful, but they weren't real cars. They didn't have style, didn't have power, didn't have anything that made Americans want to be seen in them. Willys Overland, the company that built them, was barely surviving by selling them to farmers and rural utilities. The idea of a Jeep competing in any form of motorsport was laughable. The early drag racing scene was all about horsepower and gearing. Guys were boring out flatheads, swapping in the Cadillac engines, installing multiple carburetors. The goal was simple: more power, less weight, better gearing. Jeeps had none of these advantages. They were heavy for their size, underpowered by any standard, and geared for climbing mountains at walking speed, not racing down quarter-mile strips. But here's what makes this story beautiful. Sometimes the best innovations come from people who don't know they're supposed to fail. People who look at something everyone else dismisses and see possibility instead of limitations. People like Jack Palmer. Enter Jack Palmer, the mechanic nobody expected. Jack Palmer was nobody's idea of a hot rod genius. He wasn't some California speed shop owner with a reputation and a magazine spread. He was just a 26-year-old Korean War vet who'd come home to Bakersfield in late 1951 and needed a job. He found one at a Willys dealership, which in 1952 was like finding work at a company that sold typewriters in 2010. Not exactly the cutting edge. Palmer had been a tank mechanic in Korea. Specifically, he'd worked on M4 Shermans and M26 Pershings, keeping them running in conditions that would make a civilian mechanic weep. Frozen fuel lines, sand and everything, engines that needed to start at minus 20 degrees. He learned to make things work with whatever was available. No parts catalog, no factory support. Just ingenuity and desperation. When he got home, Bakersfield was drowning in surplus Jeeps. The government had built over 600,000 Willys MBs during the war, and now they were selling them for whatever they could get. Most ended up on farms or in scrap yards. Palmer bought one for $285, drove it home, and started tinkering. Here's where it gets interesting. Palmer's Willys dealership job meant he was around these things all day. He knew every specification, every weakness, every quirk. But more importantly, he started noticing something nobody else had paid attention to. The Jeep's gearing, which everyone thought was a limitation, was actually creating a torque multiplication effect that was almost accidental genius. One night at a local diner, Palmer heard some guys talking about the upcoming weekend at Lions Drag Strip. They were discussing their cars, bragging about horsepower numbers, arguing about gearing strategies. Palmer, probably exhausted from working on civilian Willys all day, said something that made everyone stop talking. "I bet I could run a quarter mile in my Jeep faster than half the cars here." The table erupted in laughter. A Jeep? At a drag strip? This guy must have taken too many mortar shells to the head in Korea. But Palmer wasn't joking. He'd been doing math in his head for weeks, thinking about gear ratios and torque curves and weight distribution. He'd started to believe it might actually work. His coworkers at the dealership thought he was insane. His friends told him he'd embarrass himself. Even his wife, according to a later interview, said it was the dumbest idea she'd ever heard. But Palmer had seen tanks do impossible things in Korea when properly motivated. Why couldn't a Jeep? The Willys MB. Why this was automotive suicide. Let's talk about exactly what Palmer was working with. Because the specifications read like a joke, the Willys MB, officially known as the truck, 1/4 ton, 4x4, was designed to do exactly one thing: move soldiers and equipment across terrible terrain at low speeds. It was not designed to go fast. It was not designed to accelerate. It was designed to survive. The engine was a 134 cubic inch inline 4 called the Go Devil. Cute name, terrible performance. It made 60 horsepower at 4,000 RPM when it was brand new in 1941. By 1952, after years of military use, most were making closer to 45 horsepower. 45. My riding lawnmower makes 27 horsepower. We're not talking about a lot of grunt here. The compression ratio was a pathetic 6.48 to 1, designed to run on the lowest grade military fuel available. The carburetor was a simple single-barrel Carter that was so conservative with fuel, it might as well have been powered by wishes and prayers. The ignition system was basic points and condenser, time for reliability over performance. But here's where it gets really funny. The Jeep had what everyone called a 3-speed transmission, technically true, but it also had a 2-speed transfer case, which gave you high range and low range. This created 6 forward gears total, but here's the catch: nobody used them all. You used low range for off-road crawling and high range for normal driving. Using low range on pavements was considered mechanically abusive and pointless. The axle ratio was 5.38 to 1. For context, a normal 1952 car might have 3.5 to 1 or 4.1 to 1 gearing. The Jeep's gearing was so low that first gear with the transfer case and low range gave you a final drive ratio of something like 40 to 1. You could climb a wall, but top speed was measured with a sundial. The weight was 2,453 pounds, which doesn't sound bad until you realize that's with no creature comforts whatsoever. No radio, no heater that worked, no sound deadening. Seats that were basically canvas stretched over a frame. That 2,453 pounds was pure Jeep, and most of it was solid axles and frame rails. The suspension was non-existent by any reasonable standard. Leaf springs front and rear, designed for load carrying, not handling. The wheelbase was 80 inches, which is absurdly short. For comparison, a modern Mazda Miata has a 91-inch wheelbase. The Jeep was a brick on wheels with the aerodynamics of a parachute. Top speed theoretically was 65 miles per hour. In reality, most Jeeps started shaking apart at 55. The steering was so vague that highway driving was a religious experience. You pointed it roughly in the direction you wanted to go and prayed nothing unexpected happened. So let's review. 45 horsepower, agricultural gearing, leaf springs from the Stone Age, and aerodynamics that would make a barn jealous. Palmer wanted to drag race this thing. This wasn't optimism, this was delusion. Palmer's impossible modifications. Here's where Palmer's tank mechanic experience came into play. He didn't approach the Jeep like a hot rodder. He approached it like an engineer trying to solve a specific problem with limited resources. The problem: get from point A to point B as fast as possible. The resources: a Jeep that everyone else had written off. The first modification was timing. The Go Devil engine came from the factory with incredibly conservative ignition timing, set for reliability across every possible fuel quality and altitude. Palmer, working at sea level in California with decent pump gas, had room to advance the timing. He went from the factory 5 degrees before top dead center to 13 degrees. This was a bigger deal than it sounds. Advanced timing means the spark plug fires earlier in the compression stroke, giving the air-fuel mixture more time to burn and push the piston down. Too much advance and you get detonation, which destroys engines. But Palmer had calculated that with decent fuel and sea-level air density, the Go Devil could handle it. He picked up about 8 horsepower from timing alone. Suddenly, he was at 53 horsepower. Still pathetic, but improving. The exhaust was next. The military exhaust system was designed to be quiet and survive anything. It was also incredibly restrictive. Palmer built a new exhaust that looked exactly like stock from the outside, but had larger diameter piping and a straight-through muffler disguised to look like the original. Another 3 horsepower. We're at 56 now. But here's where Palmer's genius really showed. Everyone else was focused on the engine. Palmer realized the engine was fine for what he needed. The real secret was the transfer case. Remember how I said the Jeep had a 2-speed transfer case that gave you high and low range? Palmer figured out something wild. If he started in first gear with the transfer case in low range, he got massive torque multiplication off the line. Like, ridiculous amounts of torque. The engine didn't need to rev high, because the gearing was doing all the work. Then, right around 20 miles per hour, he'd slam the transfer case lever from low to high while still in first gear. This was not something the manufacturer recommended. In fact, it was probably specifically advised against. But it worked like a crude 2-speed automatic transmission. The shift was harsh and violent, but it kept the engine in its narrow power band and multiplied the torque through 2 different gear ranges. The weight reduction was surgical. Palmer removed all the military equipment, the jerry can holders, the spare tire mount, the Pioneer tools, even the canvas top frame. He pulled out the passenger seat. He drilled holes in non-structural parts of the frame. He swapped the steel bumpers for aluminum ones he fabricated himself. Total weight savings, 112 pounds. Not huge, but every bit helped. The carburetor got rejetted for California sea level air. The military jets were set for operation anywhere from sea level to high altitude, which meant they were rich at low altitude. Palmer leaned it out, getting better atomization and more power. Another 2 horsepower. Then there was the tire pressure discovery. This was pure accident. Palmer was driving his Jeep home from work one day and noticed it felt unusually quick. He checked the tire pressure and found he'd forgotten to air up after airing down for an off-road trip. The tires were at 12 psi instead of the normal 25. The increased contact patch was giving him better traction and allowing him to launch harder without wheel spin. This was revolutionary for 1952. Nobody was thinking about tire pressure as a performance modification. Palmer started experimenting and found that 15 psi was the sweet spot. Enough to not damage the tires, but low enough to dramatically improve grip. The total cost of modifications? Palmer kept receipts. $47. $47. The timing advance cost nothing but his time. The exhaust was $18 in pipe and a $12 muffler. The aluminum bumpers were $8 in materials. The carburetor jets were $3. The rest was labor and learning. For less than $50, Palmer had transformed his Jeep from agricultural equipment into, well, we'd find out what it had become. The first run, when physics broke summer, 1952. Lyons Drag Strip in Long Beach was the place to be on weekends. The strip had only been open since 1955. Wait, that's wrong. Actually, Lyons opened in 1955. Let me correct this. The strip was actually San Fernando Drag Strip, which had just opened in 1952. Either way, Palmer showed up on a Saturday afternoon in August. The pits were full of proper drag cars, chopped and channeled roadsters, flathead Fords with multiple carbs, the occasional Oldsmobile or Cadillac. Guys were checking compression, adjusting carburetors, talking horsepower numbers. And then Palmer drove in with his olive-drab Jeep. The reaction was immediate and predictable. Laughter, pointing. Someone yelled, "Wrong track, buddy, the tractor pull is next month." Palmer ignored it. He paid his entry fee. Tech inspection waved him through because the Jeep was clearly street legal, and he got in line for time trials. His first matchup was against a 1940 Ford Coupe with a worked flathead. The Ford's owner was openly amused. He walked over to Palmer and asked if he was serious. Palmer just nodded. The guy laughed and said, "All right, easy win for me then." They staged at the line. Palmer's strategy was simple, but required perfect execution. Start in first gear with the transfer case in low range. Launch at exactly 2,500 RPM, which was about as high as the Go Devil would rev without exploding. Watch the tach, not the speedometer. When he hit 2,800 RPM in first low, slam the transfer case into high range. Shift to second gear around 35 miles per hour. Stay in it until the finish line. The lights dropped. The Ford launched with tire smoke and the glorious sound of a flathead at full song. Palmer's Jeep just squatted, and hooked. No wheel spin, no drama, just immediate, violent acceleration that was completely wrong for something making 56 horsepower. At 20 miles per hour, Palmer grabbed the transfer case lever and yanked it from low to high. The Jeep jerked. The drivetrain made a sound like a robot having a seizure, and then it kept accelerating. The Ford was ahead, obviously, but not by as much as everyone expected. Halfway down the track, Palmer shifted to second gear. The Ford driver, probably confused about why a Jeep was still in his rearview mirror, shifted to third. At the finish line, the Ford crossed first, running a 17.2-second quarter mile at 76 miles per hour. Yes, respectable for a mildly modified flathead. Palmer crossed 2 car lengths behind. The announcer called out his time, 18.2 seconds at 72 miles per hour. The strip went silent. Then someone started clapping. Then everyone was talking at once. 18.2 in a stock Jeep with 56 horsepower at 2,453 pounds minus Palmer's 112-pound weight reduction. That was still 2,341 pounds. The power-to-weight ratio was abysmal. By every calculation, the Jeep should have run mid-20s at best. But here's what Palmer understood that nobody else did. The Jeep wasn't making power, it was multiplying torque. That first gear low-range launch was creating a mechanical advantage that put every ounce of the Go Devils' pathetic output directly to the ground. No slippage, no wheel spin, just pure mechanical efficiency. The short wheelbase helped too. Weight transfer and acceleration is about distance from center of gravity to rear axle. The Jeep's 80-inch wheelbase meant the weight transfer was immediate and dramatic. The front end lifted, all the weight slammed to the rear tires, and traction was nearly perfect. The Ford driver came over, looked at the Jeep, looked at Palmer, and said, "What the hell do you have in that thing?" Palmer popped the hood. Stock Go Devil engine, stock transmission, stock transfer case. Everything was there. Nothing was swapped. The guy walked away shaking his head. Palmer made 3 more runs that day. 18.4 seconds, 18.1 seconds, 18.3 seconds. Consistent, repeatable, and absolutely impossible according to every engineering principle anyone understood. Word spreads. Detroit can't explain it. By Monday morning, phone calls were being made. Hot Rod magazine got a tip about a Jeep running 18-second quarter miles. They thought it was a joke. Someone at Willys Overland in Toledo heard about it and definitely thought it was a joke. But enough people had seen it that the story had legs. Hot Rod magazine sent a staff writer and photographer to Bakersfield. They met Palmer at the Willys dealership, inspected the Jeep, and couldn't find anything except the timing advance and exhaust. The writer, whose name was Bill Crawford, was skeptical. He'd been around hot rods his entire career and knew that 18-second quarter miles required either massive horsepower or incredibly light weight. The Jeep had neither. Crawford rode along for a test drive. Palmer demonstrated the transfer case shift technique. Crawford felt the violent jerk when Palmer slammed it from low to high. He watched the tachometer stay pegged at 2,800 RPM through the shift. He felt the Jeep continue accelerating with no power loss. He had no explanation. The magazine article ran in December 1952 with the headline, "War Surplus Speed, Vet's Jeep Runs 18s." The article was skeptical but factual. They included Palmer's modifications, the times, and a disclaimer that they had witnessed it but couldn't explain the physics. Engineers from Willys Overland actually drove to California to see it. 3 guys in suits showed up at Palmer's house unannounced. They wanted to see the Jeep, inspect it, maybe understand it. Palmer, to his credit, showed them everything. He explained the transfer case technique, demonstrated it in the street, opened the hood, and answered every question. The Willys engineers went back to Toledo and filed a report. The summary, obtained decades later through company archives, basically said, "Vehicle is stock except for minor modifications. Performance verified, physics unclear, recommend no action." Translation: it works, we don't know why, and we're not going to advertise that you can drag race a Jeep because that's not our market. Accusations flew anyway. Some people insisted Palmer had swapped in a Jeep truck engine, which made more power. Inspections proved it was the MB engine. Others claimed he had nitrous or a supercharger hidden somewhere. Multiple inspections found nothing. One guy insisted the Jeep must be lighter than advertised, so they rolled it onto certified scales. 2,341 pounds with Palmer sitting in it, minus Palmer's weight of 165, gave 2,176 pounds. Still not light enough to explain 18-second quarters with 56 horsepower. The real physics were simple but counterintuitive. The transfer case shift was creating a power band overlap that kept the engine in its optimal torquey range. The first low gearing was so aggressive, it was essentially a clutch dump at high RPM with infinite mechanical advantage. The short wheelbase and leaf spring suspension were creating a weight transfer that put maximum traction at the rear wheels exactly when needed. It shouldn't have worked, but it did, and that made Detroit very uncomfortable. The Jeep drag racing movement. Palmer's success inspired exactly what you'd expect. Other Korean War vets who'd come home and bought surplus Jeeps started showing up at drag strips. By early 1953, there were at least a dozen Jeeps running modified transfer case setups at various California strips. The times varied wildly. Some guys got it right and ran high 18s. Others couldn't master the transfer case shift and ran 21s or 22s. A few over-revved the Go Devil, trying to match Palmer's times, and blew their engines spectacularly. But enough Jeeps were running competitive times that it became a minor phenomenon. Willys Overland briefly, and I mean very briefly, considered offering a performance package. Internal memos from early 1953 discussed the possibility of a competition transfer case with stronger gears that could handle the abuse. They even spec'd out a marine version of the Go Devil with higher compression for better power. But the bean counters killed it. The math didn't work. The market for drag racing Jeeps was tiny, the modifications were mechanically abusive, and Willys was struggling financially anyway. The Korean War ended in July 1953, and suddenly surplus Jeeps got expensive. The government stopped flooding the market. Prices went from $300 to $800 almost overnight. For $800, you could buy a decent used Ford that would run just as fast without destroying its transfer case every 50 passes. The movement died as quickly as it started. By late 1954, you rarely saw Jeeps at drag strips. The few that continued running were owned by die-hard enthusiasts who'd built up spare transfer cases and accepted the maintenance cost. Palmer kept running his Jeep until 1956, by which point he'd gone through 3 transfer cases and 2 engines. But for a brief moment, the Jeep had been competitive. A handful of veterans had proven that a vehicle designed to climb mountains could also run straight-line quarter miles, faster than purpose-built hot rods. It was absurd, it was brilliant, and it was completely forgotten. The engineering lesson Detroit ignored. Here's what makes this story fascinating from an engineering perspective. Palmer had accidentally discovered principles that wouldn't become mainstream drag racing wisdom for another decade. First, torque multiplication through aggressive gearing. Modern drag racers understand that horsepower wins races, but torque gets you off the line. Palmer's first low launch was creating torque multiplication ratios that wouldn't be matched until multi-speed transmissions became common in the 1960s. He was doing with mechanical advantage what others were trying to do with raw power. Second, weight transfer optimization. That short wheelbase was creating instant weight transfer to the rear tires. Modern drag cars use wheelie bars to prevent the front end from lifting too much. Palmer's Jeep was naturally optimized for weight transfer without anyone realizing it. Third, the advantage of utilitarian design in specific applications. The Jeep wasn't designed to go fast, but its design for extreme low-speed torque accidentally made it perfect for quarter-mile acceleration. Sometimes over-engineering for one purpose creates unexpected advantages in another. Detroit completely missed this. They were so focused on horsepower numbers and top speed that they couldn't see the advantage of extreme low-end gearing. Even when Willys engineers verified Palmer's times, the company didn't understand the broader implications. It wasn't until the muscle car era of the 1960s that American manufacturers started thinking seriously about torque multiplication and weight transfer. And by then, the lesson of Palmer's Jeep had been completely forgotten. The drag racing tricks that became standard, aggressive first gear ratios, optimized weight transfer, mechanical advantage over raw power, were all things Palmer had figured out in 1952. The Jeep proved that performance wasn't about specifications on paper. It was about understanding how to use what you had. Detroit's horsepower obsession had blinded them to other approaches. Palmer's military maintenance background had taught him to make things work, regardless of specifications. That perspective changed everything. Legacy and what happened to Palmer. Palmer's Jeep disappeared in 1956. He'd beaten it to death drag racing for 4 years. The frame was cracked, the transfer case was on its 4th rebuild, and the engine was tired. He sold it to a farmer in Fresno for $150. He was doing with mechanical advantage what others were trying to do with raw power. Second, weight transfer optimization. That short wheelbase was creating instant weight transfer to the rear tires. Modern drag cars use wheelie bars to prevent the front end from lifting too much. Palmer's Jeep was naturally optimized for weight transfer without anyone realizing it. Third, the advantage of utilitarian design in specific applications. The Jeep wasn't designed to go fast, but its design for extreme low-speed torque accidentally made it perfect for quarter-mile acceleration. Sometimes over-engineering for one purpose creates unexpected advantages in another. Detroit completely missed this. They were so focused on horsepower numbers and top speed that they couldn't see the advantage of extreme low-end gearing. Even when Willys engineers verified Palmer's times, the company didn't understand the broader implications. It wasn't until the muscle car era of the 1960s that American manufacturers started thinking seriously about torque multiplication and weight transfer. And by then, the lesson of Palmer's Jeep had been completely forgotten. The drag racing tricks that became standard, aggressive first gear ratios, optimized weight transfer, mechanical advantage over raw power, were all things Palmer had figured out in 1952. The Jeep proved that performance wasn't about specifications on paper. It was about understanding how to use what you had. Detroit's horsepower obsession had blinded them to other approaches. Palmer's military maintenance background had taught him to make things work, regardless of specifications. That perspective changed everything. Legacy and what happened to Palmer. Palmer's Jeep disappeared in 1956. He'd beaten it to death drag racing for 4 years. The frame was cracked, the transfer case was on its 4th rebuild, and the engine was tired. He sold it to a farmer in Fresno for $150. The farmer used it for a year, then parked it behind a barn. Nobody knows what happened after that. It's probably rusted into dust somewhere, or maybe it got scrapped decades ago. Palmer himself moved on to bigger things. In 1957, he got a job at Offenhauser Engineering in Los Angeles, working on racing engines. Apparently, his reputation for making unlikely things work had spread. He worked there for 15 years, contributing to several Indy 500 winning engines. When he retired in 1972, he'd become a respected figure in racing circles. But almost nobody knew about the Jeep. The story survived through a handful of veterans who'd been there. Guys who remembered seeing a Jeep run 18s and thinking they had witnessed something impossible. A few kept racing Jeeps through the mid-1950s, but as parts got expensive and transfer cases kept breaking, it became unsustainable. There's one surviving photo from 1953. It shows Palmer's Jeep at San Fernando drag strip, mid-launch, front wheels clearly off the ground. The photo was discovered in a box of old Hot Rod magazine contact sheets in 2008. It's the only visual evidence that any of this happened. Modern Jeep drag racing exists, but it's a completely different animal. Guys are stuffing supercharged V8s into Wrangler chassis, running 9-second quarters with 1,000 horsepower and full tube frames. It's impressive, but it's not what Palmer did. He proved the bone stock, with minor modifications and clever technique, a 45 horsepower utility vehicle could compete. Does anyone in modern Jeep drag racing know about Palmer? Not really. I found one forum post from 2015 where someone mentioned some Korean War vet who supposedly raced a Willys MB in the 50s, but they thought it was an urban legend. The collective memory had degraded from reality to myth to forgotten curiosity. The underdog that shouldn't have worked. The story of Jack Palmer and his drag racing Jeep is really a story about assumptions. Detroit assumed Jeeps were farm equipment. Hot rodders assumed you needed horsepower to go fast. Engineers assumed mechanical specifications determined performance. Palmer ignored all of it and proved them wrong. This is the advantage of not knowing something is impossible. Palmer didn't have an engineering degree. He didn't have formal training in automotive performance. He just had military maintenance experience, a weird idea, and enough stubbornness to try it. Sometimes that's enough. The Jeep's success came from understanding that performance isn't absolute, it's contextual. For quarter-mile drag racing, horsepower matters less than torque multiplication and traction. The Jeep's agricultural gearing, which made it terrible for highway cruising, made it accidentally perfect for straight-line acceleration from a stop. Palmer recognized this when everyone else saw only limitations. This lesson appears throughout automotive history: the underdog victories, the unexpected innovations, the technologies that shouldn't have worked but did. They almost always come from outsiders who don't know they're supposed to fail. Palmer saw a Jeep and imagined it running quarter miles while everyone else saw a farm truck. What if Willys had listened? What if they had developed that competition package, marketed the Jeep to veterans as a dual-purpose vehicle that could work during the week and race on weekends? The muscle car era might have started a decade earlier. The entire trajectory of American performance cars could have been different, but they didn't. They ignored it, the moment passed, and the lesson was forgotten. Palmer kept working, the Jeep rusted away, and automotive history moved on without noting that a 45-horsepower military surplus vehicle once ran competitive quarter miles against purpose-built hot rods. Sometimes the best stories are the forgotten ones. The garage experiments that worked, but nobody documented. The clever tricks that solved problems before anyone realized there was a problem to solve. Palmer's Jeep was proof that ingenuity beats resources, that understanding beats specifications, and that sometimes the slowest vehicle on paper is the fastest on the track. 45 horsepower, 2 functional gears from the transfer case swap technique, 18.2 seconds. It shouldn't have worked, but for one beautiful moment in 1952, it did, and that's enough.